Human Explorer. Anthony Walker stood unscathed under the punishing ultraviolet glare of Zephyria's sun, his exposed skin stubbornly resisting horrific radiation burns that should have fried him alive within seconds. Approaching under the protective shell of an armored transport, Orion Commander Varys stared in utter disbelief at the live video feed of this impossible alien creature casually standing on the planet's lethally irradiated surface without any protective equipment. Every Orion child learned that Zephyria's sunlight burned, blistered, and killed within moments. And yet, impossibly, this human endured, mocking the fundamental truths underpinning Orion civilization merely by existing. Varys clenched his jaw, fighting a nauseating mixture of awe, fear, and instinctive revulsion as the human looked directly at the transport's external cameras and waved. The bipedal alien's calm, friendly smile enraged Varys. Its continued survival was an insult to generations of Orions who had suffered and died under Zephyria's unforgiving light. Defensively, his mind insisted this human had to be an anomaly, a suicidally reckless individual. Its species couldn't all possess this unnatural resistance. They couldn't threaten Orion supremacy like this. Squads 1 and 2, converge on the alien ship's location. Varys snapped over the transport's comms, the rising anger in his voice surprising him. Capture the trespasser alive if possible. If it resists, you're authorized to terminate it with extreme prejudice. As the soldiers hurried to obey, Varys stared at the human's absurdly fragile-looking ship, forcibly suppressing the primal dread rising in his chest. This Anthony Walker and his disturbing immunity to the sun could not be allowed to leave Zephyria. Not until the Orion sovereignty understood the full extent of humanity's solar radiation tolerance and how to counter it. The future of his species might very well depend on it. In the sterile confines of the Orion interrogation chamber, Anthony sat shackled to a chair under the piercing gaze of Commander Varys. The human's calm demeanor only served to intensify the Orion's growing unease. "Your species has colonized dozens of worlds like Zephyria?" Varys asked, his voice tight with barely contained dread. "Planets with punishing solar radiation levels?" Anthony nodded, meeting Varys's eyes unflinchingly. "We've thrived on worlds where other species perish. It's not just me. All humans can withstand extreme UV radiation." Varys's mind raced with the implications. The Orion's own plans for expansion suddenly seemed laughably fragile if they had to compete with humans for these otherwise uninhabitable planets. He needed to report this development to the sovereignty immediately. Within cycles, the Orion leadership convened an emergency meeting, their holographic forms flickering with barely concealed agitation as they discussed the implications of humanity's unique adaptation. They tasked Varys with studying Anthony extensively, determined to unravel the biological mechanisms behind human radiation resistance and gauge if it could be replicated or countered. Anthony found himself subjected to a relentless barrage of tests and experiments, prodded and sampled by Orion scientists who seemed equal parts fascinated and unnerved by his body's resilience. They marveled at the tissue and genetic samples that revealed humanity's secret: highly efficient cellular DNA repair mechanisms and UV filtering compounds that allowed them to withstand Zephyria's merciless sun. As the grueling procedures dragged on, Varys begrudgingly started to respect Anthony's stoic toughness and resourceful nature. The human endured the poking and scanning with a composed dignity that spoke volumes about his strength of character. Delving into the secrets of Anthony's equipment, Orion technicians found that while human technology lagged behind in most areas, it showed remarkable ingenuity in adapting to harsh stellar environments. Each discovery painted a clearer picture of a species uniquely suited to expand across the galaxy's most inhospitable worlds. Between experiments, Anthony gleaned insights into Orion biology and society from overheard conversations and his own keen observations. He realized their isolationist culture stemmed from an extreme vulnerability to Zephyria's sun, which confined them to shelters and hidden cities. Their civilization had turned inward, focusing on self-preservation and viewing other species as dire threats to their precarious existence. As understanding dawned, Anthony recognized the sheer magnitude of what his arrival represented for the Orions. It was an unprecedented opportunity to expand beyond their planetary prison, but also a profound upheaval of their long-held beliefs about their place in the universe. Varys wrestled with similarly conflicting emotions. Despite his initial hostility, he found himself increasingly drawn to Anthony's quiet confidence and the tantalizing possibilities his species embodied. Yet those same possibilities posed daunting challenges to Orion dominance, forcing Varys to grapple with a future where humans might eclipse his own kind. The tests were nearing their conclusion when disaster struck. A massive solar flare erupted from Zephyria's turbulent surface, bathing the planet in a surge of deadly radiation. The Orion outposts, usually safe within their protective domes, suffered catastrophic damage as the flare overwhelmed their defenses. Alarms blared through the research facility as panicked Orions scrambled to evacuate. In the chaos, Anthony realized that this crisis would force him and Varys into an uneasy alliance, two adversaries now bound by the need to survive an impending apocalypse. As the solar storm raged outside, the human and the Orion commander faced each other, their differences momentarily forgotten in the face of a shared catastrophe. The fate of both their species and the future of Zephyria itself hung in the balance. The facility shuddered as the solar flare struck. Alarms blared, drowning out the panicked cries of Orion scrambling for safety. Anthony stumbled as the floor bucked beneath him, steadying himself against a wall. Through reinforced windows, he watched in horror as the capital city's protective dome cracked and shattered under the onslaught of deadly radiation. Varys burst into the room, his eyes wide with terror. "Our shelters are collapsing, thousands are trapped, and we can't reach them." Anthony's mind raced, processing the dire situation. "Your people can't survive out there, can they?" Varys shook his head, desperation etched on his face. "The radiation levels, it's certain death for any Orion." He hesitated, then met Anthony's gaze. "But you could survive it." Understanding dawned on Anthony. Without a word, he nodded, already moving towards the door. Varys quickly outfitted him with Orion tech, a communications device, portable life support units, and tools for cutting through debris. "Be careful," Varys said, his voice thick with conflicting emotions. "And thank you." Anthony stepped out into hell. The air shimmered with heat, buildings warped and melted around him. He pushed forward, guided by Varys's voice in his ear, towards the first collapsed shelter. "Life signs detected," Varys reported. 30 meters ahead, under the fallen archway." Anthony dug through the rubble, ignoring the searing pain as his hands blistered and healed repeatedly. He uncovered a group of terrified Orions, their eyes wide with disbelief at the sight of him. "It's okay," he assured them, helping them to their feet. "I'm here to help." Hour after hour, Anthony battled exhaustion and the relentless assault of Zephyria's sun. He freed trapped Orions from crumbling buildings, repaired failing life support systems, and carried injured aliens to safety. In the command center, Varys watched in awe as the humans' heroic efforts unfolded on monitors. "He saved another group," an aide reported. "That's over 100 now." Varys nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "Direct him to the eastern quarter next. My family's there." Anthony pressed on, his muscles screaming in protest. He found Varys's family huddled in a partially collapsed home, the children whimpering in fear. With gentle words and sure hands, he led them to safety, earning tearful thanks from Varys over the comm. As the solar flare finally began to subside, Anthony stumbled back to the command center. Exhausted but triumphant, he was met with a sea of grateful Orion faces. Varys stepped forward, his voice filled with emotion. "You've saved us all. Not just those you rescued, but our entire people. We see now how wrong we were about other species, about humans." In the days that followed, as Zephyria began to heal, Anthony found himself addressing the Orion High Council. He spoke of cooperation, of the strength found in diversity, and of a future where Orions and humans could face the challenges of the cosmos together. Varys stood beside him, nodding in agreement. We pledge to forge new bonds with humanity, he declared. Our isolation ends today. As Anthony prepared his ship for the journey home, his heart swelled with pride. He had not only saved lives but had opened the door to a new era of interspecies cooperation. Just as he was running final pre-flight checks, a priority message flashed on his console. Anthony's blood ran cold as he read the warning from Earth. A group of human extremists had learned of the Orion's vulnerability and were planning to exploit it. Anthony's hands clenched into fists. The fragile peace he had worked so hard to build now hung by a thread, threatened by the very people he had come to represent. Anthony's hands trembled as he read the urgent message flashing on his console. His stomach churned. A group of human militants had discovered the Orion's vulnerability to solar radiation. They planned to exploit it. He sprinted through the corridors of the Orion Command Center, his footsteps echoing off the metallic walls. Bursting into the council chamber, he found Varys conferring with other officials. "We have a problem," Anthony panted. "A big one." Varys's eyes narrowed as Anthony explained the situation. The Orion's face contorted with rage, his fists clenching at his sides. "You dare betray us like this?" Varys snarled. "After everything?" "It's not us," Anthony pleaded. "It's a rogue group. Most humans don't even know about you yet." The High Council convened within minutes. Anthony stood before them, acutely aware of the hostility radiating from the assembled Orions. Councilors shouted over each other, their voices filled with fear and anger. "We must cut all ties with the humans," one councilor demanded. "Prepare our defenses," another urged. "We cannot risk annihilation." Anthony raised his voice above the din. "Please, you have to listen. These militants are extremists. They don't represent humanity as a whole. If you react with hostility, you'll only prove them right about us being a threat." The chamber fell silent. Anthony took a deep breath. "Let me go back to Earth. I'll stop them myself." Murmurs rippled through the council. Varys stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "And how do we know you won't simply join them?" he asked. "Because I've seen what we can accomplish together," Anthony replied. "I won't let anyone destroy that." Varys studied him for a long moment. "Very well," he said finally, "but you won't go alone. A team of our best operatives will accompany you." Days later, Anthony found himself crouched in the shadows of an abandoned warehouse on Earth. Beside him, 3 Orion agents watched the building across the street with unwavering focus. "That's the place," Anthony whispered. "Kroll's base of operations." They had tracked the militants across 3 continents, always one step behind. Now, finally, they had a chance to end this. The team moved silently, disabling security systems and slipping past guards. In the heart of the complex, they discovered a massive device. Anthony's blood ran cold as he realized its purpose, a weapon designed to amplify and focus solar radiation. It could wipe out the entire Orion homeworld. Alarms blared. Gunfire erupted around them. Anthony and the Orions found themselves surrounded, facing down the barrel of a sleek rifle held by a scarred man with cold eyes. "So," the man said, his voice like gravel, "the Orions sent their pet human to do their dirty work." "Silas Kroll," Anthony replied. "Stand down. You don't know what you're doing." Kroll laughed. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm ensuring humanity's dominance in this galaxy. Now tell your Orion friends to hand over their tech, or I'll give their homeworld a taste of what this beauty can do." Anthony's mind raced. He couldn't let this happen. He stepped forward, locking eyes with Kroll. "1-on-1, Anthony said. "You and me, no weapons, no backup. Winner takes all." Kroll raised an eyebrow. "And where would we have this little duel?" Anthony pointed to a map on the wall, indicating a stretch of barren desert. "There, under the full heat of the sun. Prove you're better than us pet humans." A cruel smile spread across Kroll's face. "You're on." "On." Anthony locked eyes with his opponent, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his muscles. Kroll's lips curled into a sneer. "Your funeral boy." He barked orders to his men, who quickly arranged transport to the chosen battleground. Hours later, the merciless Saharan sun beat down on a stretch of barren wasteland. Shimmering heat waves distorted the horizon as Anthony and Kroll faced each other, their audience a mix of wary Orions and Kroll's stone-faced lieutenants. Anthony's light combat gear clung to his skin, already damp with sweat. Across from him, Kroll wore similar attire, but with the addition of a high-tech cooling system integrated into his suit. "Last chance to back out," Kroll taunted, cracking his knuckles. Anthony said nothing, dropping into a fighting stance. Kroll lunged forward, his fist whistling through the air. Anthony ducked, feeling the wind of the near miss ruffle his hair. He countered with a swift jab to Kroll's solar plexus, eliciting a grunt of pain. The two men traded blows beneath the scorching sun. Kroll's attacks were precise and brutal, but Anthony's enhanced physiology allowed him to shrug off hits that would have felled a normal human. With each passing minute, Anthony felt his strength growing, his cells drinking in the intense solar radiation. Kroll noticed it too. His confident smirk faltered as Anthony began to press his advantage, landing a flurry of punches that drove the older man back. "What are you?" Kroll snarled, wiping blood from a split lip. Anthony didn't waste breath on a response. He pressed forward, his movements fluid and relentless. Realizing he was outmatched in the open desert, Kroll's eyes darted to a nearby rock formation. Without warning, he turned and sprinted towards it, revealing the entrance to an underground complex. Anthony hesitated for a split second before giving chase. He knew Kroll was trying to negate his solar advantage, but he couldn't risk losing him. The cool darkness of the facility engulfed them. Emergency lights cast an eerie red glow as Anthony pursued Kroll through winding corridors. He could hear the other man's labored breathing echoing off the walls. As they ran deeper into the complex, Anthony's enhanced senses picked up on the hum of machinery. He realized this must be where Kroll's weapon was housed. Thinking quickly, Anthony veered off into a side passage, searching for a control room or power junction. He found what he was looking for, a maze of computer banks and electrical panels. Without hesitation, Anthony began ripping out crucial components, plunging sections of the facility into darkness. Alarms blared as the complex's systems went haywire. Anthony used the chaos to his advantage, navigating the darkened hallways with ease while Kroll and his men stumbled blindly. As he rounded a corner, Anthony came face to face with a group of Kroll's soldiers. They raised their weapons, but Anthony was faster. He disarmed the first man with a lightning-quick move, using the captured gun to incapacitate the others. The skirmish left Anthony breathing hard, his muscles burning with exertion, but he pushed on, driven by the urgency of his mission. Finally, he reached a massive blast door. Beyond it, he could hear the whine of powering up systems. Anthony's blood ran cold as he realized Kroll must already be inside, preparing to launch his weapon. With a surge of desperate strength, Anthony forced the door open. The chamber beyond housed an enormous device, its core pulsing with ominous energy. Kroll stood at a control panel, his fingers flying over the keys. "It's over, Kroll!" Anthony shouted. "Step away from the controls!" Kroll spun to face him, his eyes wild. "You're too late. In moments, the Orion homeworld will be nothing but ash." Anthony's mind raced. He couldn't reach Kroll in time to stop the launch sequence. His eyes fell on an exposed power conduit. Without hesitation, he grabbed it, ripping it free in a shower of sparks. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The weapon systems flickered and died as the entire facility began to shake. Kroll howled in rage, charging at Anthony with murderous intent. The two men grappled amidst the collapsing ruins of the complex. Concrete dust filled the air as support beams groaned and snapped. Anthony could feel his strength waning without the sun's energy to sustain him, but he fought on with unwavering drive. Kroll landed a vicious blow to Anthony's ribs, driving the breath from his lungs. But as the fanatic drew back for another strike, Anthony saw his opening. He surged forward, using Kroll's own momentum against him. In one fluid motion, Anthony flipped his opponent over his shoulder, slamming him hard onto the ground. Kroll lay still, finally defeated. Anthony stood over him, chest heaving as he fought to catch his breath. The complex gave another violent shudder. Anthony knew they had to get out. He hauled Kroll to his feet, half dragging the semi-conscious man towards the exit. They emerged into the blinding sunlight just as the underground facility imploded behind them. Kroll's remaining forces, seeing their leader defeated and their base destroyed, threw down their weapons in surrender. The Orion operatives approached cautiously, their eyes wide with a mix of awe and disbelief. One of them stepped forward, bowing deeply to Anthony. "We have witnessed your incredible power and unwavering courage," the Orion said solemnly. "You have saved not only our world, but prevented a devastating war. We pledge our loyalty to you and vow to forge an unbreakable alliance between our peoples." Anthony nodded, feeling the weight of this moment. He had done it. He had protected both humans and Orions from... Anthony stepped off the sleek Orion shuttle onto the gleaming surface of Zephyria. The planet's twin suns bathed the spaceport in a warm, golden glow. He inhaled deeply, savoring the crisp, slightly metallic air of the alien world. The elite Orion operatives who had fought alongside him on Earth flanked Anthony as they strode towards the welcoming committee. Varys stood at the forefront, his usually stoic features softened by a rare smile. "Anthony," Varys said, clasping the human's arm in the traditional Orion greeting, "you have done the impossible. You have saved not just our world, but the future of our species." The Orion High Council, resplendent in their ceremonial robes, bowed their heads in respect. Anthony felt a swell of emotion in his chest, overwhelmed by the gravity of the moment. Days later, Anthony found himself standing before a vast assembly of Orion dignitaries and military leaders. The grand amphitheater buzzed with anticipation. Varys stepped forward, holding aloft a shimmering medallion. "For your unparalleled bravery and dedication to peace between our peoples," Varys proclaimed, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "we bestow upon you the Star of Zephyria, our highest honor for a non-Orion." As the medallion settled around Anthony's neck, the assembly erupted in thunderous applause. Anthony opened his mouth to speak, but his words were drowned out by a deafening explosion. The ground shook violently. Panic spread through the crowd as smoke billowed from the city beyond. Varys grabbed Anthony's arm, pulling him close. "We're under attack," Varys hissed, his eyes wide with disbelief. Chaos engulfed the amphitheater as reports flooded in. A renegade faction of the Orion military had launched a coordinated assault on key installations across the planet. Their leader, General Zixel, broadcast a chilling message on all frequencies. "The human scourge ends now," Zixel's voice boomed. "We will purge Zephyria of their influence and reclaim our rightful place as rulers of the stars." Anthony watched in horror as Orion turned against Orion. Varys rallied his loyal forces, but they were quickly overwhelmed. The renegades' superior numbers and strategic positioning gave them an insurmountable advantage. As the days wore on, Anthony witnessed the fall of Orion's cities. Varys and his remaining allies retreated to a hidden bunker deep beneath Zephyria's crust. It was there, in the dim light of emergency power cells, that Varys turned to Anthony with a desperate plan. "We need your help," Varys said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Your unique abilities, your tactical mind, they might be our only hope of turning the tide." Anthony nodded, a fire burning in his eyes. "What's the plan?" Together, they assembled a diverse team of Orion rebels and the few human allies trapped on Zephyria. They pored over maps, devising strategies to undermine Zixel's regime. Their first mission took them to the outskirts of the capital. Under cover of darkness, they sabotaged a renegade communications array, severing Zixel's link to his southern forces. Anthony led the charge, his enhanced physiology allowing him to move with preternatural speed and strength. As word of their success spread, more Orions flocked to their cause. Anthony and Varys crisscrossed Zephyria's harsh terrain, from scorching deserts to frozen tundras, striking at Zixel's forces with guerrilla tactics. Their boldest operation came during a massive solar flare. While Zixel's forces scrambled to protect their sensitive equipment, Anthony's team infiltrated a heavily fortified base. They moved swiftly through the facility, disabling security systems and freeing captured Orion dissidents. As they led the prisoners to safety, Anthony caught sight of a familiar face among the liberated Orions. It was Lyra, a young scientist who had once shown him kindness during his early days on Zephyria. Her eyes widened in recognition. "You came back for us," Lyra whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Anthony squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "We're in this together now." The resistance grew stronger with each passing day. Orions who had once feared Zixel's iron rule now openly defied him in the streets. Anthony felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps they could win this war without further bloodshed. But Zixel was not finished. As Anthony and Varys celebrated their latest victory, alarms blared throughout their hidden base. Zixel's forces had launched a massive counter-offensive, somehow breaching their defenses. In the ensuing chaos, Anthony lost sight of Varys. He fought his way through waves of renegade soldiers, desperately searching for his friend. When the dust settled, Anthony's heart sank. Varys and several other key resistance leaders had been captured. Anthony stood amidst the wreckage of their base, his fists clenched at his sides. He knew what came next, a final confrontation with Zixel himself. As the remaining resistance fighters looked to him for leadership, Anthony steeled himself for the battle ahead. Anthony crouched behind a twisted metal barrier, his eyes scanning the horizon. The twin suns of Zephyria were obscured by roiling clouds of charged particles, casting an eerie, flickering light across the barren landscape. The solar storm raged overhead, crackling with electromagnetic energy that made his hair stand on end. He checked his gear one last time, a cobbled-together stealth suit, an Orion energy pistol, and a handful of improvised explosive devices. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Anthony took a deep breath, steadying himself for what lay ahead. The entrance to Zixel's command bunker loomed before him, a fortress of gleaming metal and energy barriers. As another wave of solar interference washed over the area, Anthony made his move. He sprinted across the open ground, his enhanced physiology pushing his muscles to their limit. Alarms blared as he approached, but the storm's interference scrambled the bunker's sensors. Anthony slipped through a gap in the perimeter defenses, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, emergency lighting cast everything in a blood-red glow. He moved swiftly through the corridors, relying on memorized schematics and his heightened senses to avoid patrols. A group of guards rounded a corner, and Anthony flattened himself against the wall, holding his breath as they passed within inches of his position. Finally, he reached the detention level. Anthony peered through a small window, spotting Varys and the other resistance leaders in a heavily fortified cell. He placed an explosive charge on the door's locking mechanism, ducking back as it detonated with a muffled thump. "Anthony!" Varys exclaimed as the human burst into the cell. "How did you—" "No time," Anthony cut him off, tossing Varys a spare weapon. "We need to move now." They freed the other prisoners and made their way towards the exit. But as they reached a junction of corridors, a hail of energy bolts forced them back. Anthony caught a glimpse of General Zixel himself, flanked by a squad of elite guards. "Kill them all!" Zixel roared, his face contorted with rage. Anthony and the others took cover, returning fire as best they could. But they were outgunned and outmaneuvered, their meager supply of energy cells rapidly depleting. "We're not going to make it like this," Anthony shouted over the din of battle. He turned to Varys, his eyes blazing with intensity. "I have a plan, but it's risky. Can you keep them busy?" Varys nodded grimly, gesturing for the others to concentrate their fire. Anthony slipped away, navigating the labyrinthine corridors until he reached the reactor control room. His hands flew over the alien controls, bypassing safety protocols and rerouting power feeds. Sweat beaded on his forehead as radiation levels in the chamber began to spike. Warning klaxons blared throughout the facility. Anthony sprinted back towards his comrades, shouting for them to follow him. They ran through the bunker's twisting passageways, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter as Zixel's forces realized the danger. They burst out of the bunker's entrance, gasping for air. Anthony urged them on, not daring to look back until they had put significant distance between themselves and the doomed facility. A blinding flash lit up the storm-darkened sky. The ground shook violently as a massive explosion consumed the bunker, sending a towering pillar of fire and debris into the air. The shockwave knocked them off their feet, and Anthony felt the searing heat wash over him even at this distance. As the dust settled, Anthony saw the extent of the destruction. A vast, smoldering crater marked where Zixel's stronghold had stood. The surrounding landscape was scoured clean, the very rock melted and twisted by the force of the blast. Varys helped Anthony to his feet, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "You've done it," he said hoarsely. "You've dealt Zixel a crippling blow." But their victory was short-lived. A distant rumble drew their attention to the sky, where a massive shape was taking form among the roiling storm clouds. Anthony's blood ran cold as he recognized the outline of an orbital weapons platform, Zixel's final, high-stakes endeavor. Varys grabbed Anthony's arm, his voice urgent. "We need to split up. I'll coordinate our ground forces to keep Zixel's remaining troops busy. You take a team and disable that weapon before it's too late." Anthony nodded, already formulating a plan. He gathered a small group of the most capable fighters, knowing that the fate of Zephyria, and perhaps the entire galaxy, now rested on their shoulders. Anthony crouched in the shadows of the orbital control station, his breath steady despite the pounding of his heart. The massive mirror array loomed above, its reflective surface glinting ominously in the starlight. He signaled to his team, a mix of human and Orion operatives, each chosen for their unique skills. "Remember," Anthony whispered, "we're here to shut this thing down. No heroics." They moved swiftly through the station's corridors, using handheld scramblers to disable security cameras. At the first checkpoint, Anthony nodded to Lyra, the Orion scientist. She stepped forward, her fingers dancing across a control panel. The doors hissed open, revealing a group of startled guards. Before the guards could react, Anthony's team struck. Stun bolts crackled through the air, dropping the renegades where they stood. They pressed on, leaving unconscious bodies in their wake. As they approached the central hub, alarms blared. Anthony cursed under his breath. "They're onto us! Move!" They sprinted down the hallway, energy bolts sizzling past their heads. Anthony skidded around a corner, coming face to face with a towering Orion. The alien's muscles bulged unnaturally, veins pulsing beneath gray skin. "Cracks!" Anthony spat, recognizing Zixel's feared lieutenant. Cracks lunged, his enhanced speed catching Anthony off guard. A massive fist connected with Anthony's jaw, sending him sprawling. He tasted blood but rolled to his feet, years of training kicking in. The two circled each other, trading blows. Crax's strength was overwhelming, but Anthony was quicker, more agile. He ducked under a wild swing, driving his elbow into Crax's solar plexus. The Orion grunted, but didn't fall. Anthony's team engaged the other guards, leaving him to face Crax alone. The fight was brutal, neither combatant willing to yield. Anthony felt ribs crack under Crax's assault, but he pushed through the pain. Finally, Anthony saw an opening. He feinted left, then dropped low, sweeping Crax's legs. As the Orion toppled, Anthony struck hard and fast, targeting nerve clusters. Crax convulsed, then lay still. Panting, Anthony rejoined his team. They burst into the control room, weapons ready. But it was too late. The firing sequence had begun. Anthony rushed to the main console, his fingers flying over alien controls. "It's targeted populated areas," he shouted. "I need to redirect it." The others provided cover fire as Anthony worked. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he bypassed security protocols, fighting the system's safeguards. A countdown flashed on the screen. 10 seconds, 9, 8. With a final command, Anthony slumped back. "It's done." They watched in awe as the massive beam lanced out, missing the cities and striking barren wasteland. The impact was staggering, carving a glowing crater into Zephyria's surface. "We're not finished," Anthony said, turning back to the console. "We need to shut this whole system down." As they worked to disable the array, reports flooded in. Varys and the resistance forces had launched their assault planetside, catching Zixel's troops off guard. Anthony allowed himself a small smile as he listened to the updates. Suddenly, the door to the control room exploded inward. Zixel himself stood there, his face contorted with rage. Behind him, Varys appeared, bloodied but unbowed. "It's over, Zixel," Anthony called out. "Your weapon is neutralized. Your forces are in retreat." Zixel's eyes darted wildly around the room. For a moment, it seemed he might surrender. Then, without warning, he turned and ran. Anthony and Varys gave chase, following Zixel through twisting corridors. They cornered him near a plasma exhaust port, its shimmering energy casting an eerie glow. "You have a choice," Varys said, his voice heavy with the weight of their shared history. "Face justice for your crimes or—" But Zixel wasn't listening. With a snarl of defiance, he flung himself into the roiling plasma. Anthony lunged forward, but it was too late. Zixel vanished in a flash of searing light. In the stunned silence that followed, Anthony's communicator crackled to life. The renegade forces were standing down. Victory was theirs. Anthony sagged against the wall, exhaustion finally overtaking him. He looked at Varys, seeing his own mixture of relief and disbelief mirrored in the Orion's eyes. "It's really over," Anthony breathed. Varys nodded, then straightened up. "Come," he said. "Our people are waiting." Anthony stood before the Orion High Council, his posture straight and his gaze steady. The vast chamber, with its soaring crystalline arches and pulsing bioluminescent walls, hummed with anticipation. The defeat of Zixel's renegade faction had opened a new chapter for both species, and Anthony felt the weight of history on his shoulders. "We extend our deepest gratitude," intoned the High Elder, his voice resonating through the chamber. "Your actions have saved countless lives and preserved the future of our people." Anthony nodded, his voice clear as he addressed the assembly. "The challenges we face together have shown us the strength of unity. Now we have an opportunity to build something greater than either of our civilizations could achieve alone." The council members murmured in agreement. One by one, they voted to embrace a new era of cooperation with humanity. As the final tally was recorded, Anthony felt a surge of hope for the future. Days later, he stood in a smaller chamber, reciting the oath of office as the first human ambassador to the Orion people. Varys, newly appointed as his Orion counterpart, clasped his arm in a gesture of solidarity. "We have much work ahead of us, my friend," Varys said, his multifaceted eyes glinting with drive. Anthony nodded, already envisioning the challenges and triumphs that lay ahead. "Let's get started." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Anthony found himself shuttling between meetings with human and Orion scientists, helping to establish the framework for their joint research initiatives. In a state-of-the-art laboratory, he watched as teams collaborated on developing new solar shielding technologies. Dr. Elena Chen, a brilliant human physicist, worked alongside Crix, an Orion materials expert. Their hands moved in tandem, manipulating holographic models of molecular structures. "If we can stabilize the nanomaterial lattice," Elena explained, her fingers dancing through the projection, "we could increase the shield's resilience by an order of magnitude." Crix chittered in excitement, his own appendages adjusting the model. "Yes, and by incorporating our bioadaptive polymers, we could create a shield that actively responds to solar fluctuations." Anthony smiled, seeing the spark of innovation that transcended species boundaries. On Zephyria's surface, the construction of the first human outpost proceeded at a breakneck pace. Anthony surveyed the progress from a reinforced observation deck, watching as human and Orion workers moved with practiced efficiency. The facility took shape before his eyes, a marvel of engineering designed to withstand Zephyria's brutal environment. Massive solar collectors unfurled like metallic flowers, tracking the volatile sun and channeling its energy into experimental storage systems. As Anthony walked through the partially completed structure, he paused to speak with a human engineer and her Orion counterpart. "How's the new energy conversion system holding up?" he asked. The human engineer, Sarah, grinned. "Better than we hoped. By combining our quantum flux technology with Orion plasma containment principles, We've achieved a 37% increase in efficiency. Her Orion colleague Zorn added, and our simulations suggest we can push that even higher once we fine-tune the calibrations. Anthony nodded, impressed by their progress. Excellent work, both of you. Keep it up. In another section of the outpost, Anthony observed Varys overseeing the training of the newly formed Solar Guardians. The elite Orion unit moved through combat drills with fluid grace, their movements synchronized with their human partners. Varys approached Anthony, his expression one of quiet pride. They're adapting well to the joint protocols. The human emphasis on individual initiative complements our innate teamwork abilities. Anthony watched as a mixed squad of humans and Orions responded to a simulated solar flare event, working in perfect harmony to secure vital systems and protect vulnerable personnel. They'll be ready, Anthony agreed, and not a moment too soon. Later, in a medical research facility, Anthony met with Dr. Lena Valdez, a renowned human geneticist, and Thrix, a venerable Orion physician. They huddled around a holographic display showing complex DNA sequences. We've identified several promising avenues for enhancing Orion radiation resistance, Dr. Valdez explained. By combining genetic markers from extremophile Earth organisms with Orion DNA, we may be able to significantly boost their natural defenses. Thrix's tendrils quivered with excitement. And our preliminary trials of human-derived treatments for radiation sickness have shown remarkable results. We're on the cusp of a medical revolution. Anthony felt a swell of pride at their accomplishments. The cooperation between their species was yielding fruit faster than he had dared to hope. As the outpost neared completion, Anthony and Varys prepared for their joint expedition into Zephyria's uncharted regions. They stood at the airlock, double-checking their equipment, a mix of human and Orion technology designed to keep them alive in the planet's harsh environment. Ready? Anthony asked, securing his helmet. Varys nodded, his own protective gear gleaming in the airlock's light. Let's make history. Anthony and Varys trudged through the scorched Zephyrian landscape, their protective suits gleaming in the harsh sunlight. The terrain grew increasingly treacherous as they ventured into uncharted territory, jagged rock formations jutting up from the cracked earth. Look there, Varys said, pointing to a distant shimmer on the horizon. As they approached, the outline of massive structures began to take shape. Towering spires reached toward the sky, their once gleaming surfaces now dulled by eons of exposure to Zephyria's unforgiving elements. Incredible, Anthony breathed, his voice filled with awe. An entire city, hidden all this time. They entered the outskirts of the ancient metropolis, their footsteps echoing through empty streets. Intricate designs adorned the walls of buildings, telling stories of a civilization long forgotten. Anthony ran his gloved hand along a carved mural, marveling at its complexity. This level of architectural sophistication, it's beyond anything we've seen in Orion history, Varys said, his multifaceted eyes wide with wonder. As they pressed deeper into the city's heart, they came upon a vast plaza dominated by a colossal structure. Its design suggested some sort of energy collection apparatus, with countless crystalline panels arranged in intricate patterns. This must be it, Anthony said, the solar harnessing technology we theorized about. They entered the building, their helmet lights cutting through the gloom. In the central chamber, they found a control panel still humming with residual energy. Anthony approached it cautiously, his scanner detecting unusual radiation readings. Wait, Varys cautioned, grabbing Anthony's arm. Look at this! In a corner of the room lay a pile of bones, twisted and malformed. Anthony's stomach churned as he examined the remains more closely. The skeletal structure was warped, with extra limbs and grotesque protrusions. What could have caused this? Anthony whispered, horror evident in his voice. Varys pointed to the faintly glowing core of the energy apparatus. Mutagenic radiation. They pushed too far, unleashed forces they couldn't control. The implications hit Anthony like a physical blow. This advanced civilization had destroyed itself in its quest for power. He looked at Varys, seeing his own shock and dismay reflected in the Orion's eyes. "We can't let this technology fall into the wrong hands," Anthony said firmly. "The risk is too great." Varys bristled. "But think of the potential benefits. We could revolutionize energy production, solve—" "At what cost?" Anthony interrupted, gesturing to the mutated remains. "We'd be gambling with the future of both our species." They argued back and forth, their voices echoing through the empty halls of the ancient city. Finally, Varys slumped his shoulders in defeat. "You're right," he conceded. "We must protect our people, even from ourselves." With heavy hearts, they oversaw the sealing of the ruins. Explosive charges were set, collapsing key structures and burying the ancient city's secrets beneath tons of rock and sand. As the dust settled, Anthony and Varys stood side by side, watching the sun set on Zephyria's horizon. The weight of their decision hung between them, an invisible barrier where once there had been easy camaraderie. "I suppose this is goodbye," Varys said quietly. Anthony nodded, unable to find the right words. They clasped hands one last time before boarding separate shuttles, each bound for their home worlds. As Anthony's ship broke Zephyria's atmosphere, he gazed down at the planet's scarred surface. The experience had changed him profoundly, instilling a deep sense of caution about the pursuit of scientific advancement at any cost. Back on Earth, Anthony threw himself into his new role as an advocate for ethical research practices. He spoke at conferences, lobbied governments, and worked tirelessly to ensure that the lessons of Zephyria were not forgotten. Across the galaxy, Varys grappled with the weight of his people's hidden past. He guided the Orion leadership toward a more measured approach to technological development, always mindful of the devastating consequences of unchecked ambition. Though separated by vast distances, Anthony and Varys maintained a connection through occasional transmissions. Their conversations were tinged with a shared understanding of the burdens they carried and the tough choices they had made for the greater good. As Anthony prepared for another day of championing responsible scientific progress, he paused to look at a hollow image of himself and Varys on Zephyria. Despite the challenges they had faced, he couldn't help but smile at the memory of their unlikely partnership.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.